We've been seeing grapes all day, but I'm going to talk about some of the work that we've been doing with grape growers in the state and also the homeowners. So this is typically what you see in Wyoming vineyards. We have a short growing season and low winter temperatures, spring frosts, poor soils. We definitely have some problems. You can see this is a vineyard in Portland where you have two varieties that are doing really well. This is an 8-year-old vineyard, and then you have this variety in the middle that doesn't have the cold hardiness, and so it keeps dying back to the ground every year. And then you have suckers that come back, and they are not productive. So that's a major problem that is commonly seen in Wyoming vineyards. We have some benefits. We have a hot and dry growing season, and if you look at grape production worldwide, controlling fungal diseases is one of the major problems. And any grapes that you're getting in the grocery store or the wine that is made, growers have to spray at least between 15 to 20 times a year just for sustainable production of these wines. They are affected by a lot of fungal diseases. We have this big benefit where if you talk to growers, they might spray once a year, or they might not spray at all. So it's almost like an organic production of grape wines. We don't see any fungal diseases on our grapes here. So we have the potential to produce extremely high quality fruit and wine in Wyoming if we can identify cultivars or varieties that do well here, and we can refine management practices that are suitable to places, to vineyards in Wyoming. So that's the goal of our program. Is we want to identify cultivars and rootstocks that are suitable for Wyoming conditions. Currently, all our grape vines are grown, they're bare-rooted. They're grown on their own roots, they're self-rooted. And we can identify suitable rootstocks, say that grow in heavy clay soils or high pH soils, and optimize management practices to where they can survive the winter conditions. Then we can have good scion stock combinations for Wyoming. And then we also want to optimize grape vine management practices. So what training systems would you use for a specific location, or what kind of pruning system would you use? What kind of canopy management practices would you use? Do you need to do leaf pulling, or do you need to do cluster thinning? So there are a plethora of management practices that need to be followed in order to get the right quality of berries and eventually produce the right quality of wine. So we're looking at cultivars, we're looking at management practices, and we're looking at this interaction. So a specific cultivar can produce a different response if you use a different management practice. So there is an interaction. It's a complex interaction between the climate, the site, your microclimate, which is the climate of your vineyard, the kind of cultivar you grow, and the kind of management practices you follow. So you overlay on this on top of each other, and you're looking at a number of factors that you would need to optimize for specific locations in mind. And then this is something we are doing in the lab, where we are using precision breeding or exploiting the grape genome, which has been sequenced it's available for now 7 years, and combining tools in the field, combining tools and techniques in the lab. Ultimately, the goal is to improve cultivars and also refine management practices for wine. So that's something that we have started for our grape research program. One of the major studies that we have initiated is assessment of cold damage in grape wine cultivars. It should come as no surprise to anyone that cold is a major factor that limits grape production in Wyoming. Essentially, low winter temperatures and unseasonal frost. So we can have a really late frost in the spring, or we can have a really early frost in the fall, and essentially that can mean the difference between having a crop or having no crop. So this is a major factor. Sheridan area fall frost can hit as early as September 15. Can be earlier in some other areas. And freezing temperatures, we had temperatures ranging from -10, -35 during this past winter season, and it was a pretty harsh winter. So we have these are some of the limitations we have as far as cold is concerned. So we took a look at the vineyard. This is what it looked like in September. So we planted these grapes last year in June. Nice conditions. We had a lot of rain. It was hot. They grew vigorously, and we had 35 cultivars on 1 acre area. And we have a smaller trial at the Powell Research Center. Come October 6th, we had our major snowstorm, and many of you might remember this. We lost power in Sheridan for 2 days. but we had a lot of frost damage. And this is what the top growth gets killed. Now, if this frost will come earlier, then your grapes might be mature, they might be ready to ripen, but if you get this kind of frost, then your produce is gone. And so this killed all the top growth. You can see the grass is still alive, which is, so the grapes are, the top growth is dead. Now, this is frost damage, this is not freeze damage. So this is, that's something we are doing in the field, is we are evaluating varieties for earliness and looking at varieties that will mature and ripen before they get hit with the first frost in the fall season. Now this is some preliminary data that we got for our first year trial. Is we were amazed to see that we had close to 68% survival among all the varieties. 32% of them were dead. And one thing we noticed is wines that were presumed to be dead are breaking bud. So essentially they're not dead, but they're late. And there is a difference in, you can see a drastic difference in cultivar as far as the amount of heat that is required for these cultivars to break bud. And so some of the cultivars require greater heat, others are early. And so it's this pool of cultivars that we are looking at, cultivars that can break bud early and get a head start in the growing season. So this is the pool data for all cultivars. Eventually what we do is we go back and look at individual varieties, individual cultivars, and see what is our survival rate. Another thing we are doing is we are surveying grape cultivars grown in the Sheridan community. And so this is, you can see this is a Concord grapes that we took this picture last year. We chatted a little bit with the neighbor, with the owner, and he said that they have this grape vine for 20 years. And if it's there in the community for 20 years, if it's growing there, we know that it's definitely cold hardy. And so this is, we see this as we drive along in the neighborhoods, we see a number of grape vines. We are interested in knowing what are these cultivars. A lot of times the wine comes with the property and the owner is not aware of it, but we still have a solution for that. We can find out from certain characteristics, looking at grape morphology, we can identify what variety it is, if we have certain information. So we look at the berry color, try to figure out what kind of grape it is. Is it a table grape, wine grape, or a juice grape? And then this is an important piece of information we need, which is the veraison date. So veraison is basically the date when the berries start switching color. And that's once they start switching color, essentially that's the stage when they start ripening. So that's the developmental stage when they start accumulating sugars and they start the ripening process. And if we know this date, then we can figure out if this variety will mature and ripen before the first frost can hit. So this piece of information is pretty important for us. Berry sugars and acid contents. This is pretty easy to analyze. And so last year I got a call from a grape grower, and it was weird because she called someone in Casper for some reason, and then the call got diverted from Casper to me. So it came in a roundabout way, but after I got her call, within 30 minutes we were at her location with a refractometer, and we could get berry samples. We could analyze the sugar contents. She had good sugar contents. I told her, go ahead and harvest your berries, because they were going to have a fall frost 3 days after that, and she called me basically to ask me, shall I harvest my grapes or not? So we can get a lot of information by just surveying grapes in the community. We're doing this currently, and it's interesting. Lacey, who is our extension intern and doing a lot of this work, she took a survey 2 days ago. Was it 2 days ago? She went around in the community and she started chatting with one of the owners of these grapevines, and he ended up giving her a bottle of jelly that he makes from his grapes every year. An excellent quality jelly. She got it here. We all had it with bread, and it tasted better than what you would get in Walmart or the grocery store. So that's the added benefit of surveying these grapevines in the neighborhood. And that's the kind of information that we're interested in, is what kind of grapes do you have? What are you doing with the produce? And once we have that kind of information, the first thing I do is, if they know the name of the cultivar, that's great. If not, we still bring cuttings, we put them in our greenhouse, grow them here, and certain morphological characteristics, look at the shape of the leaf, look at the leaves, if they're colored at the back, generally you can tell it's a juice type of grape. And we have certain molecular markers also. It's cheap. For $2 or $3, you can do some molecular analysis, and you can right away tell what cultivar it is. Yes?
If somebody on their own is grafted, their own to make them, maybe they're doing their own experimenting?
Yes.
Can you tell that too, or?
If they are doing their own experiments, you can.
So they created their own cultivar. So.
Well, you have markers. You could still tell the parents from where it came. You have markers that are common to some of the parents, and typically what I've seen is the earliest printed information that I have on grapes in Wyoming dates back to 1892, and so the first Wyoming Agricultural Experiment Station Bulletin, which I found online from Google Documents, it has information on Concord grapes being grown at the experiment station in Lander. So that's kind of the historical information. If you look at it, you can tell that most of the grapes that are grown in Wyoming are the Concord style, the Labrusca juice style grapes. So this is a key piece of information, and I talked to a number of people. I talked to my family physician, and he had a grape growing in his backyard, and he said he makes ice wine out of it, which is how I got the idea of planting grapes in the high tunnel and seeing if we can make ice wine. So he had his variety. He has it for 20 years. He doesn't know what the name is. So we have it growing in our vineyard, and essentially we haven't analyzed it yet. We know it's a juice type of grape, but I just gave it his name. So I call it Williams Selection. And once we find out what it is, then we know that this is the variety, and we can recommend this for growing to home members. So this is some of the information we get from the community. It's ready-made information that we can readily utilize for our research program. We also do some work in the lab. We assess freeze-induced damage to compound buds, and I'll explain real quick what a compound bud is. But a lot of times, homeowners and growers come to me and say, how do I prune my wine? How much do I keep? How much do I prune? And if you were in a tropical region, the simple answer would be just hack it back. So typically 90% or more of the growth that is produced by a grape each year has to be removed. And it's one of the things is balanced pruning, which is you don't want to keep too much. If you have too many buds there, you're going to get excessive vegetative growth. Your berries are going to be really small in size. They're going to be poor in quality. And if you're in a cold region, then essentially your wine is getting stressed. It doesn't have enough reserves for it to overwinter, and it can suffer from winter damage. And so balanced pruning is, you want to ensure that you have enough growth, to have enough photosynthesis to be carried out, which will sustain your wine over a number of years. But then you also want to make sure that you manage the number of clusters that you have on your wine so that you get the right yield and the quality. And so how much to prune, or you have pruning formulas. It's come down to pruning formulas for specific cultivars or specific group of grapes, where you can determine how much to prune based on the amount of wood that was produced in the previous season by the farmer. Now that's all theoretical. In areas like Wyoming, pruning formulas are heavily adjusted. And the reason because they're adjusted is your pruning formula is based on the assumption that your nodes or buds that are left after cutting or after pruning your grape are alive. Now what if you suffer from a lot of cold damage? If your wine suffers from a lot of cold damage, then this pruning severity or this pruning formula has to be adjusted. So if you have more cold damage, then you do a lighter pruning, you keep more buds, and that way you are adjusting for those buds that are dead. So in order to find out the pruning severity, or to find out how much to prune, we need to find out how much cold damage occurs. And there are some techniques to do that, very simple techniques. So this is what a compound bud looks like, and we can slice open some buds if you're interested. But if you look at this is dormant wood that is collected from a vineyard in Wyoming, and you can see that every node has one of these buds. And essentially, what a compound bud is, if you slice it open, it has 3 buds inside. So this is a primary bud, the secondary bud, and a tertiary bud. And typically, what happens is the primary bud is the one that is at the most advanced stage of development. And this is a bud that will produce the shoot under normal conditions and the flowering and the fruiting. In case of cold damage, the primary bud is the first bud that gets killed. And so if that gets killed, depending on what kind of cultivar you're growing, you might not get any produce that year. So your production might be 0. There are some cultivars where the secondary buds can grow and give you some kind of production. It's less than what you would get in the primary bud, but you can still account for the damage that takes place in the primary. And so essentially what we do is we bring these samples and we slice them open, and we're going to look at the damage to the primary buds, the secondary buds, and the tertiary buds. It's a relatively straightforward procedure. Now, this is a microscopic picture. You can see if you slice open a bud, you can see here the primary, secondary, and the tertiary is dead from cold damage. This is, you can see here, a control bud. And we actually have samples in the lab where we have sliced these buds open, and you can take a look at it under the microscope. So we have a bud that's alive, and we have one that's dead. So typically, this is what you would see if you have extreme cold damage. And what we would do is visit the growers in the middle of April or end of April, get dormant wood from them, bring it to the lab, incubate it for a day, and then start slicing buds and see how much damage we have. So based on this damage, we can get back to the grower and say, okay, prune lightly this year, you have a lot of damage, or you don't have enough damage, you can prune under normal conditions. So that's something, some kind of information we can get just by slicing buds and looking at cold damage. Now there is another technique. So this is basically what it entails. You get your dormant buds, use a blade, and you slice it open, and you can look at primary, secondary, and tertiary bud damage. Now this is something that even a grower can do in the field. We can show growers how to do this kind of analysis. And so you could collect wood or samples from your vineyard at random. Now you have to account for variations in your vineyard. If you have a low spot, then it would show more damage than a high spot. So you account for these variations, but you can collect these samples at random, slice them open, and look at bud damage and decide how much pruning severity you want to follow. There is another technique that we follow in the lab, which is an incubation technique, and really simple. Again, these samples that we get from the field is we cut them into single node cuttings, and we basically put them in an incubator. And after 28 to 30 days, a month, you can see here that these are different varieties. We have replicate samples. You can see here that there are some that are growing, which tells you they are alive, and then there are some that don't produce any growth. So clearly you can tell there are some that are alive, there are others that are dead. Now one disadvantage of this technique is it doesn't tell you whether it's the primary bud, the secondary bud, or the tertiary bud, which is why the slicing technique is easy and it's more accurate. But this is another technique you can use to correlate what you see with the slicing technique. And what we saw among different varieties is we were surprised to see there was from 50 to 75% damage. So the damage that takes place due to the cold, it widely varies among different cultivars. Now, the interesting part is it doesn't only vary among cultivars, it varies within the same cultivar that is planted at different locations. And that's where this data becomes really important. Now this is, we collected La Crescent variety from 3 different locations. You can see here Powell, Wheatland, and Woodland. And the damage in Wheatland is around 38 to 40%. But La Crescent has really heavy damage in Powell and in Woodland. And so these are, again, these are mature vineyards. They're 7 years or older. And so if we collect this repeatedly and we see the same trend, then we can make a general information that, okay, La Crescent probably does well in the Wheatland area, doesn't do as well in the Powell and the Woodland area. So there are other varieties that we can recommend, probably Frontenac or Marquette or other wine grapes that might do better in this area. So that's the critical piece of information that we can get from analyzing buds for cold damage. Again, this is something we have just started, is we are screening vineyards for the presence of grapevine viruses. And viruses are ubiquitous. We have more than 60 viral diseases, and they are mainly spread through infected propagation material. So if you were to buy your planting material from Walmart or from a box store, or if you were to buy it from a nursery that was not certified, selling certified material, and by certified material I mean material that has been tested to be virus-free, you might be introducing virus-infected plants in your vineyard. The problem with viruses is they stay latent for a long time, and so they might not show up for 7 to 8 years. By the time your vineyard is mature and ready to produce, then you start seeing virus infections. And the only solution to that is you uproot your vines and you burn them. So you spend 7 or 8 years, you've invested all that time, and then you have to uproot and burn them. So we are being proactive. We're already collecting these samples, and we're already collecting samples for cold damage. We can use the same samples for testing for viruses. So we're not investing any additional work or energy in doing this work. Main problem with viruses is it reduces wine vigor and quality, but it also reduces berry quality. So you can see infected wines, you can typically see they have lower sugar content and they have poor pigmentation. Essentially, it's going to affect your wine quality. This is some interesting data I got from a VIRA 20 meeting. So this was one of the regional meeting that deals with viruses. And this was data from the Washington State Department of Agriculture. And typically they said, if you have virus-infected plants, time taken to recoup your investment can be done. So instead of 8 to 9 years or 10 years, it can take up to 18 years. Again, if you had to remove virus-infected vines as they did in the 1940s, then you would lose 1/3 of your gateway manuals. So viruses are a big problem. And our planting material is coming from Washington State. It's coming from New York, where there is a heavy prevalence of viruses. So we are taking this step where in a short period of time, we can screen planting material that comes from outside, and we can see if they're infected with viruses or not, even if they don't exhibit the physical symptoms. And if these samples are showing viruses, we can intimate the grower ahead of time. So that's something we are doing is we are collecting these wood samples. Age of Wyoming vineyards is anywhere between 1 to 10 years. So most of the young vineyards, the chance that we might see visual symptoms of viruses is low. And we have 6 to 8 major cultivars that are commonly grown. So what we do is we collect these dormant wood samples, leaf samples, and we bring them to the lab, and we have really easy detection techniques. So once we bring them to the lab and process them, within 2 to 3 hours we can get a result whether that sample is infected with a virus or not. So once we find that information, we can go back to the grower, check where he has got his planting material from, and then we can intimate probably the nursery or also inform the grower about this risk. We are doing a lot of surveys where we meet growers. So this is kind of the map where we're talking to grape growers. Most of them are scattered in the Linger-Torrington area, and that's where Lacey is doing a lot of work. We have an expanded survey where we go to the growers, talk to the growers, and basically we are getting all kinds of information, right from what are the kind of soils you have, where do you get your planting material from, what kind of training systems do you follow, what kind of pruning systems do you have, what kind of canopy management practices do you follow. So every single piece of information that we can get from growers, we are getting it, and the plan is to compile all of this together, and ultimately we would end up having a grape production manual for Wyoming. So if you look at production manuals, you have grape production manuals for almost every state, and getting this kind of information, we could have grape production information specifically for regions in Wyoming. So you can see we have growers in the Basin area, in the Bighorn area. We have a grower in Powell whom we visit often. Lacey visited a grower in Sheridan yesterday. We have a winery and a grape grower in Riverton. And then we got some samples. This was from a homeowner actually, so that it's not a grower but a homeowner in Casper. And this is through basic personal information. The grower contacted me. He was making his own wine. He basically has a winery business, and he also had some grape wines. And so that we got a few samples from him, and we are testing them for core damage and also for the presence of viruses. Now, this is a lot of travel. Most of the work is done by graduate students, undergraduate students, so they're becoming experts in grape production. And ultimately what we plan to do is, once we gather all this information together, we will pool it, get all the data, and eventually it will end up being a grape production manual for wine. So we have a lot of people who are involved in this. So the Ag Experiment Station, we are really privileged to be here in this building and work out of this building. Lacey Fisher got an extension internship from the Cooperative Extension Services. And then our grape program here, even though it's only an acre, it's a lot of work. And so we have really good support from the Sheridan R&E Center staff. We work really closely with them, and we have a great team. We have collaborators from Sheridan College. So we have Sheridan College students working in the lab doing this kind of analysis. Wyoming grape growers and homeowners, if they don't entertain us or let us in their vineyards or in their home, then there is no way we can get these samples. So that's been a big help. That's been a big cooperation. My department, Plant Sciences. So it's basically a collaborative effort between a number of people and group effort from teaching, research, and extension. So with that, I'll stop and I'll take any questions. Yeah.
I have a question. If you find a variety that's infected with a virus, is there any treatment at all? Or
No.
do you have to destroy that?
You just have to destroy
You
it.
have to destroy it. So it's important to catch it early before somebody invests several years into that.
Exactly. You have to be proactive. And the problem is, even when you buy material from a certified source, there is a chance when, certification has taken place in 1 year,
Sure.
and they haven't been certified for a couple of years after that, there's a chance that, their mother plants are infected, and they are spreading infected material.
It seems to be useful to, every time you get something in, immediately check it.
Yes,
Before
it
you
is.
put it out in the field.
Right, it is a good idea to get random samples and check them for viruses.
I guess along those lines for virus infection, I know for like a lot of agronomic crops that have crop insurance, do they have something like that for grapes if you do run into virus?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure about that, but even though you had insurance, I mean, you
Yeah.
spent like 7-8 years, invested all that time and money.
For the losses.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you might at least be able to recoup some of your losses.
Yes,
Yeah, that's
I'm not sure if they have that.
What was it about grapes that it was chosen for this research versus other fruits?
Oh, I work in grapes, which is why we.
That's your specialty?
Yeah. But having said that, I mean, especially work with viruses, it would be really easy to do it with other fruit crops, because once we have samples, this is done by diagnostic labs across the country, and sample. If you would send your sample to a diagnostic lab, it would cost anywhere between $35 and $40. So it's a little expensive, but once you do a lot of samples, the cost starts getting cheaper.
I noticed your map, southwest corner, you didn't have any sample, any samples of people with growing grapes. Is that because they're not commonly grown there, or you just don't have any
Let me go back. Oh, so you mean here?
in the southwest? Yes.
We don't know of anyone
You just don't know of
growing
anybody
grapes.
yet.
Yeah. So if anyone grows grapes there, and if anyone has information, then we can add it to our database. Yeah, one thing I do when I get calls is right away I have a database where I have the phone numbers, and then if people call us about questions with grapes, we make sure we follow up and get the rest of the information.
When you counted the live grapes this year, you counted both the ones that budded, say, earlier and the ones that are budding quite late now?
Right, yes.
Those late budding ones, what kind of a future do they have when they're budding so late in the season?
They might not have
Are
a
they
future.
eventually going to start dying back, I guess?
Yes, that is a real possibility. There are times when they might make up for that late growth, and they might produce really high quality fruit. So that's something we want to test, which is why we have the cultivar triangles. Is we want to test if the ones that bud late are also the ones that mature.
Is it, I'm sorry, go ahead. I've already asked you.
I did too. Go ahead.
You're looking at frost damage in the fall. What about like our Wyoming weather where we might have warm up in March and then all of a sudden have a 2-foot snowstorm in May, say, because we see a lot of trees around here that break bud in March, April, and then that snowstorm, since they are out of dormancy, cripples them. It breaks tons of branches and stuff. Is that going to be an issue for vines? And so in that, would like those late breaking bud varieties, would they better withstand that type of weather that we see?
Yes, that's possible, and we see that. If you have these fluctuations, especially in March and April, you can see that the grapes can break bud, and then they get hit by a frost, which is why we recommend pruning really late. So if you prune your grapes, then there are hormonal realignments in the vine to where if they see a window of warm weather, they can break bud. But if you haven't pruned them, then you can still extend that dormancy, and which is why if someone asks me when do I prune my grapes, end of April or beginning of May is a safe time to prune grapes.
I was just gonna, isn't it possible that the grapes could start budding a little later, but then after every season, they could adapt to the climate a little bit through maybe some kind of epigenetic modification? I mean, have you seen that before?
I don't know.
Where they may genetically adapt?
Well, they may,
under
but
those stress conditions?
it's, the time, might be, it might take a really long time for them
Okay.
to do that. That's my case. But we are learning a lot from the growers. That's one advantage we have in visiting the growers is we are learning a lot from them. And it's actually some very critical information that we are getting from already established methods.
I was curious on your mortality,
Mhm.
you had like 30% or so. Have you already looked at where they were grown in the vineyard and your comparison of cultivars in that 35%?
Yeah, it's,
Mortality.
we typically see, and that's a good question. So what we've done is we've planted at random, but then we have them in groups of 2. And so we typically see if one is dead, then the other one is also dead. So it's kind of,
Okay.
yeah, that data is kind of relating. And again, I say that they are dead, but
Yeah.
there might be a chance they might still break burn.
But this
Because
is, you don't have enough data at this point.
Right,
Right,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, it's been unusually cold, and so that's one of the things is, they're breaking bud late than probably they would do last year or.
But it's not a certain cultivar that's dying? It's not?
Yes, we have-
It's
so-
across cultivars?
Yes, we can specifically see, so that's what I meant is, there are cultivars where, they're planted in groups of 2s. And so if we see a dead one, then the one next to that is also dead. And we see that across the vineyard. So they're all randomized, and we see that trend.